common on the common leadership curriculum. And the second one will be the 6th week of the Institute, and we'll do some debriefing and just talking about next steps in our leadership development then. But today, there are several things we want to do. First of all, I want to welcome my 2 wonderful colleagues from Bridgewater State University, Dr. Jakari Griffith, who's chair of the Department of Management and Marketing in the College of Business, and also Dr. Luis Paredes, who is the director of institutional diversity. And both these folks are people that I've observed both as leaders and have done really a wonderful job of talking about leadership, paths to greater leadership, and particularly notions of leading from the middle, and for making the most of the opportunities and the qualities that we already have. And so that's very much on point for what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to go over, first of all, just spend a few minutes talking about the major components of the Common Leadership curriculum, much of which most of you have encountered already. And then I'm going to ask that Dr. Griffith talk with us about this whole concept of servant leadership, grounded in the philosophy of Ubuntu, and help us to understand that way of looking at leadership. Now, then I've asked Luis to enter into a discussion with Jakari so that they can kind of fill out this discussion of leadership and begin to engage all of you in a broader discussion of how these basic principles and approaches affect you and help provide a pathway for you through the Institute and on out into your life later on. I wanted to say how impressed we were with all of you yesterday. It's clear that you are already accomplished leaders, people of honor, who have been chosen. You're chosen ones for current and future leaders on the continent. And we're really looking forward not only to share some of our insights and wisdom with you, but also to learn from you. And we have a great deal to learn. Then that will take roughly half an hour, maybe a little less. And then we want to spend the majority of the time engaging you in discussion, hearing your thoughts. And then I know that some of you have been having a difficulty accessing the strengths assessment. So we'll try to reserve just a couple of minutes at the end of the session if needed, so that you can get some help. I think Wing Kai is probably our greatest resource on that. So, Common Leadership curriculum components. There's both a philosophy, an approach, and then some tools that you have. And one of the biggest tools that you have is the strengths assessment. You'll find out more about this as you listen to sessions 1 and 2. And when you get the results back, you will see which of the 34 Clifton strengths rise to the top for you based on your responses to the questions. I want to tell you it's been tried, but it's difficult to fool this test. I really encourage you to pay close attention to the results and then to work your way through another component of the CLC, which is the Leadership Development and Action Plan. That's quite an involved process that helps lead you through discovering your strengths and how best to use those. But it's also a way of a place for you to begin developing your vision as a leader. Now, I want to say, with respect to the leadership development and action plan, that you need to, by the end of the 3rd week of the Institute, and that's the reading week, you need to have identified who you want to be accountability partners with. And that's a person that can be from this particular cohort, or it can be from your country cohort. That's up to you. But you will be partners for each other. It's a reciprocal arrangement that you have with your accountability partner. And that person will not only work with you during the Institute, but will also be your partner following the Institute. There are a number of steps that we go through in the first 3 months and forward. And so that person will be an awesome resource for you, and we hope of a lifetime friend and colleague. I was struck when I was reading through the WhatsApp that you all are already supporting and helping each other with advice on the leadership, the Clifton Strengths Assessment, how to access that. I was also touched by a couple of comments where people were saying, you know, we spend so much time paying attention to other people and supporting their success and their ability to thrive, that we sometimes don't take the time to think about ourselves and how we're developing and what's going on with us. So this is your chance. And that, in fact, is a key component of the leadership curriculum, which is that notion of self-reflection. Greater leadership and leadership growth begins with you and your understanding of who you are in the world, and what it is in the world that you want to contribute to help and support your community, however community is defined for you. So really take this time, give yourself the gift of that time that you've been afforded by this honor of being a part of the Institute, and really spend the time that it takes, the resource of yourself to explore your pathway to developing leadership. And an important part of that is also going to be certainly us, our wonderful leaders, here at Bridgewater, but also your contemporaries, your fellows will be a great resource to you as well. Our notions of leadership come from a variety of different places. And so I'd encourage you to think about in your family broadly defined, what was your birth order and what was your role in that family. It is very likely that those early experiences that you had, your methods for survival and for contributing to your family had a role in shaping what you regard as leadership. What you see as you watched your parental figures, what did you learn about the exercise of power, about sharing power, about becoming your best self? Those are early ways of shaping your notion of leadership and who you are as a leader. Those are good things to know. That's a wonderful point of self-awareness. It's also something you need to be willing to let go of and entertain the possibility that there are other strengths that you have that may or may not have been recognized by that early community and family that you were a part of. So that's really an important resource for you. Another question that people often ask about leadership is, are leaders made or are they born? So think about that. What are your beliefs around that? Do you think anyone can be a leader? Think about that, give that some thought. Here in the United States, the origin of much of our notion of leadership actually came from our military. That's one of the oldest organizations and forum for exercising leadership, and also recognizing the need for exercising leadership. So in the United States, we had a lot to learn and are still learning, because while in certain circumstances that top-down, span of control, hierarchical form of organization and leadership in a military situation, in an emergency situation, may be absolutely necessary. But if that is our primary model for leadership, we have some learning to do, indeed. So I hope that I'm looking to Megan and Jabril and Wing Kai. Does that cover the curriculum components? Anything you'd like to add before I turn to Jakari? All set? Okay, great, good. Okay, that, by the way, is something I've had to learn to do on my leadership path, is to rely on others to help me and to trust that they will do that well, and they do. So, Jakari, I'm excited to hear from you about this whole notion of servant leadership. Jakari and I had quite an interesting conversation the other day about the fact that we in the United States have a great deal to learn, and also have a great need for people who embrace the concept of servant leadership. So Jakari, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, and we'll enjoy listening to you. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you are. Good evening, perhaps even. I just want to say it's a thrill, a privilege, and an honor to stand with you, to stand beside you, to stand before you, to talk about a concept that I think is very, very important to us all. I've heard it said that second to love, which is, I think, a universal phenomenon that we could all relate to. Leadership is the second most important force that has moved mankind over mountains, over streams, has created societies. And it's also those very same qualities that have also led to declines in certain organizations, corruption, so forth and so on. I think one of the hallmarks of leadership success is when we stop focusing on the leader and start focusing on the process that empowers, that enables, that strengthens all of the persons that are in the organization. And so I wanted to start today's conversation very briefly by at least asking us to reflect on the statement below. Amazing what could be accomplished when you care less about who deserves the credit. I want you to think about that just for a brief moment. When it's not about me, when it's not about I, but when it's about a we, and when it's about an us. The empowering nature of thinking about an organization in terms of its capacity, and that capacity being fully dependent on all of the members in that organization. What am I doing as a leader to make sure that they have the very best circumstances to conduct their work? What am I doing as a leader to make sure that those around me feel cared for? What am I doing as a leader to make sure that I'm pushing people and growing them so they fully realize their talent, their ability, their capacity? This is really the fundamental essence of leadership. And so it's not about a position, it's not about a person, it's not about a role, right? It's about the agency that you create just by virtue of the fact of people coming into contact with you. And so I'm going to go to the next slide here. I wanted to think about today's discussion, recognizing that we all have very unique perspectives of leadership. Certainly our worldviews are colored by culture, national origin, societal differences, differences in government. And so I wanted to go to what has been described as the hallmark of the study of leadership across the globe. And naturally that study is called the Globe Leadership Study. This is a very large study that was initially conducted in the 90s to try to identify behaviors and attributes of leaders that spanned across the globe. So that no matter if you are a person living in Barbados, someone living in Argentina, someone living in Ukraine, someone living in Jamaica, what were the attributes that were universally endorsed across societies, across cultures, across governments, across, you follow me? And these researchers have established quite a robust body of findings. And so one of the things I kind of wanted to focus on today, because we do often think about leadership in terms of a position or somebody in a role or someone in authority. And naturally, it's easy to do that because they are the most visible part of the organization. I wanted to talk a little bit about the survey findings to see if there's any similarities or commonalities with the concept of servant leadership, but more importantly, how important servant leadership maps on or mirrors the very important concept of Ubuntu. So this survey here, I just wanted to kind of share with you the fundamental questions it asks. It asks, how does national culture influence the kinds of leadership behavior a society expects? There are societal norms here in the United States, as Wendy was kind of highlighting, hierarchical, perhaps singular in focus, a great woman or a man, he or she leading the masses, so to speak. I'm just using that as an example. And that is consistent perhaps with the cultural norms of the United States, that where there's an emphasis on individualism or perhaps hyper-individualism as it's been described. What behaviors generally lead to success? What are some distinctions between high-performing leaders and low-performing leaders? And more importantly, how important is it that top company leadership match or exceed or fall below a society's expectations? Now, I did my best to try to place this in the slides in a way that you can see. Now, this is you saw the parameters of the study, many countries. And what these researchers did is essentially they offered a survey that tested 21 very unique and specific leadership behaviors, the kinds of behaviors you would find across the globe. And some of the things that were interesting is that they were curious about when a senior leader behaves in a way that is inspirational, visionary, and has lots of integrity, focuses on performance and moving things forward and making progress. They understand the system and how to operate, the diplomatic, self-sacrificial, I can go on. That those around them, those in their immediate circle, are more dedicated to them, okay? And when you look at a leader, his or her immediate circle, and how that has an impact on the organization itself, how it has an impact several layers below where that leadership resides, you can also see that there's some similar qualities, meaning that I'm a person who perhaps is in the lowest rung of the organization, and yet I can still really appreciate the visionary nature of the leader and the leadership that is guiding this country. There's some interesting findings here, but some that map onto today's discussion, where the nature of being diplomatic, here we have a pretty high correlation, that being diplomatic and being sensible in terms of our interaction with others, and being self-sacrificial. This is interesting to me, meaning I take the hits, meaning that I go where others don't, meaning I take the blame, meaning I defend, meaning I protect. How are we doing? Meaning I give voice. I make sure others are heard. That emphasis is not about me, but it's about us. It's about followers. It's about who they are and who they're becoming. It's about the talent that resides within them, and me as a leader, making sure it is cultivated to its fullest. This nature of self-sacrifice, focused on human orientation, and certainly being a team integrator, these are pretty strong correlations. And certainly, I think the things that we look for when we're thinking about the very highest helm of an organization, being inspirational, visionary, naturally those come to the top. But it's fascinating that these human-oriented, other-oriented characteristics really matter significantly across the globe than when compared to, if you look below, status consciousness, right? Self-centeredness, autocratic, right? And so in many instances, there have negative correlations. I say that to say that the terms that are specific to servant leadership means servicing others, guiding, so forth and so on. I have a definition I'll share with you, seem to map squarely on the same behaviors that invite very high levels of top management team commitment, okay? Naturally, also, it's these kinds of behaviors that simply map onto firm performance, being diplomatic, being seen as a person who's collaborative, being self-sacrificial, and practicing modesty. These are behaviors that have very, very important and critical roles on performance, but more importantly, aside from performance, how people feel. And when people feel included, they feel developed, they feel like they're celebrated, they stay, they're more satisfied, they perform. Let's go on. Now, are there differences between low performing leaders and high performing leaders? Well, according to the Globe research, this is a resounding yes. The lighter colored bars represent some inferior qualities of leadership to low. The blue bar represents high. How the Globe study is defined mission critical are the things that absolutely move the needle for the organization, the things that are vital for the organization's continued success. And not surprisingly, again, the things that are very, very important, if we look at this mission critical bracket, again, we see the notion of having some integrity. So it means, celebrating wins of others, certainly, when those persons have performed well or deserve recognition. We also have this notion of diplomatic, again, followed by self-sacrificial. I am not at the apex of it all, but rather I'm just another integral part or component to this larger whole. And together we are moving forward to get something done that is important to us all. These other important behaviors, again, highlighting that service-oriented nature, participative, being a team integrator, humane orientation, that falls just below, but you see where we're going. I'm leaning on these studies because I'm trying to identify some central behaviors that we can all relate to regardless of where we are on the planet, and also to illustrate the real importance of recognizing that at the core, when we do emphasize service, when we focus on upliftment, when we focus on building, when we focus on growing, when we focus on listening, these are all the hallmarks of servant leadership. These are all the things that lead to extraordinary success, whether you're an entrepreneur, maybe a supervisor in a local building plant facility, whether you're a high school principal. It is advocating for consensus or seeking out as best as you can, not simply defending the status quo or making sure that it preserves my narrowed interest. It's a responsibility to recognize and say loudly, there are people's voices here that have not been heard. How do we include them? How do we invite them to a broader conversation? It's also asking and trusting people that they, as integral components, have ideas that perhaps I am not thinking of, that they could be trusted to do wonderful things if given the tools, the resources, and the encouragement. With that, servant leadership has several hallmark characteristics or behaviors. I identified a few today that I thought would be helpful. Listening. How many folks could identify with the feeling of being heard but not listened to? Because that person, he or she, is waiting to provide you the response they want to, rather than really internalizing and synthesizing the thing you said. Empathy. How rare is it that someone could relate to your feeling, though they're not directly in the moment in your lived experience, but understanding that, yes, that could be sad or perhaps frustrating or disappointing, and giving them space to have a feeling, you identifying with that feeling and encouraging them to push forward that, you know what, tomorrow will be better. I've seen you've succeeded in the past. I know no doubt tomorrow that you're going to do better, so forth and so on. Empathy, a critical ingredient missing perhaps in lots of discussions today, but also the essence of our human existence. It is the tie that binds us all together. And whether we believe it or not, or we believe that perhaps my station in life, because I have more resources, protects me, we're all in this together one way or another. That also then means we have to help one another. There is an obligation or a duty to help those that are less fortunate, to help those beside me so that they too can also realize their full potential. As Wendy highlighted in her initial description of the importance of leadership, awareness, right? Being able to recognize your own personal limitations, your biases. Wendy also highlighted the importance of your strengths. Research shows that when you are more aware of your own idiosyncratic attributes, your strengths, your weaknesses, the more in tune you are with them because you've reflected and you've kind of paid attention to where they have served and not served you. When you do those things, it's also easier to identify and pull those strengths out in others. It's also easier to identify and pay attention to weaknesses. Now, I want to talk about weakness for just a second. Weakness is a strength in development. That's all it is, all right? And I also want to highlight that a weakness becomes a strength when you pair a person who has a weakness with somebody who has that as a strength. Again, when we think about the togetherness that is essential for Ubuntu, I am because we are, I'm as strong as the weak. Their weaknesses allows me
Jakari,
Can you hear me?
we can now, but we
Okay.
missed that last minute.
Okay,
You were breaking up.
no problem at all. I'm trying to move this over so I can broadcast it, but you obviously see me struggling, don't you? All right, let me put this on, okay. My iPod headphones kicked in randomly. But this awareness of your strengths, your weak and others, and trying to build alliances with other folks whose strengths are your weaknesses, and really just capitalizing on those persons in your immediate network, in your work circle, in your corner. This allows you certainly to grow. It is stewardship, right? We are all responsible for something. And in an ideal world, we should be leaving it better than when we found it, right? We should be taking care of the resources that had been granted to us or given to us by nature. We should be thinking about how hard others have toiled so that our organization can experience success today, right? We should be thinking about how we recognize our human capital, our human talent, the people that show up to work for us every day and deliver without question, without hesitation, without discontent. We should be thinking about, are we stewarding our organizations, our people in a way that is life-giving and certainly breathes excitement into their existence in a workspace, in a church space, in a community space, wherever. But more importantly, we're not done growing, right? We have to continue to evolve. Wendy highlighted that. We have to continually reflect on our leadership practice. We have to continually ask ourselves, do our assumptions today still hold true? Really important, because you have to allow your thinking to become updated over time, because as we have noticed, the internet, the world is changing in new and awesome and incredible ways. Our very definition of community is different because of technology. What assumptions hold, what assumptions don't hold, and if we remain true to growth, to stewardship, to passion, to being self-aware, to listening, to being empathetic, to reflecting on our leadership practice, to always centering the importance of others ahead of our own needs, our own egos, our own kinds of goals, and really as a guidepost, emphasizing the importance of community, right? Then we all will succeed, right? Your success will be my success. My success will be your success. This will be our success. And so today I just want to have us reflect ever so briefly on Nelson Mandela's quote. I'll stop sharing now. And I'm going to try to exit out of there. Leadership is behavioral. I just went through 3 slides of behaviors. It's not positional, okay? The capacity to integrate, motivate, and mobilize others to bring a common aspiration to life is what leadership is all about. It's not about a position. It's not about formal authority. It's what you can do with your skills in your station, in the space that you find yourself currently, to bring out the very best in others. And if everybody does that, if everybody focuses on somebody else's need, then that means nobody's needs go unmet. And I want to highlight that as the last takeaway for our conversation on servant leadership. Think about those around you. Remember those beside you. Focus on those in front of you. It's been a pleasure having this conversation with you today. Thank you.
Jakari, that was really wonderful. Thank you so much. You just express those concepts so beautifully, and I see you. So, Luis,
yes,
you're on next.
Yes, thank you, Wendy, and good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening. It is really a pleasure to be here with everyone, and thank you, Jakari, for amplifying the ideals of leadership. And I want to connect that same quote from Nelson Mandela to how it's about behaviors, because it allows us to be in touch with our humanities, but at the same time, the idea of leadership being behavioral allows us to be in contact with our inner selves, allows us to also be aware of our surroundings and how that informs the logics that we take into consideration, that we may prioritize to move work forward. But the idea of leadership being behavioral also allows us to be reflective, to be responsible for that reflection, to create trust among the people that we might be working with or next to. It allows us to also be diverse in every sense of the word, right? It allows us to take pieces from different horizons, from different spaces, and co-create something different, something unique, which then allows us to make it engaging, which then leads us to make it operational. And in that operational sense of creating leadership, I think that we have that responsibility of taking action or create a momentum for whatever idea we may have in mind. Because through that possibility, it allows us to interrupt also things that may not be working. It may allow us to also consider other aspects of leadership logics, or or it will allow us to be in touch with people more closely, more intimately, which then creates this, at least through my eyes, creates this leadership which is encapsulated by self-love, self-esteem, balance, some type of balance. There's always joy when we do this kind of work. What kinds of support systems we have around ourselves, what kind of security too, and what kind of spiritual base, right? I think that the idea of leadership being behavioral and not positional is what got Nelson Mandela to be president of South Africa after 27 years of being in prison, right? The people spoke, the behavior spoke, right? The actions of the people spoke instead of the positionality. So if you put it into context, behavior will overthrow anybody, will overthrow power if it's well organized, right? So when we think of leadership, we have to also consider all of those efforts that come together. So Jakari, I just have a question for you, right? I mean, I get to work with you. It is a pleasure to work with you. And this question is in relationship to your leadership. So in your experiences, both inside and outside of the classroom, how do you think that activism plays a role in leadership?
Absolutely. So I think the connection between leadership and activism historically has been quite clear. If I think about the movements of, certainly the 60s, if I think about the movement and that was being spearheaded by certainly Mandela and his colleagues, the thing that made these movements so powerful was that these leaders simply were the sounding boards, but reflecting the voice of the people. I mean, as I can see it, and channeling through them feelings, thoughts, and positions that weren't being readily heard with the establishment. And it was oftentimes taking voices that had been silenced or sidelined and giving a sense of agency to that through the behavior of trying to inspire, trying to create a vision for either discontent or the desire for change. So absolutely, there is a fundamental connection between activism and leadership. I think what might make it different today is that we have the concept of leaderless activist groups, where it's a shared phenomenon among many people who are stepping in and out of leadership roles on the fly to get something done. So that's a really fascinating intellectual debate to have. Can you have an effective group that is leaderless? And I think the arguments say yes, you can. But does the absence of a leader make it more difficult to ensure that demands are met because there's no one person to broker with? So this is kind of a research related question, but I think historically, contemporary evidence would suggest that those two are very tightly connected.
Thank you for that, Jakari. I mean, and the reason why I asked that question is simply because in order to get anybody to activate, any group, any person to activate, any leader to activate, there has to be a process. And that process has so much to do with that socialization, with that behavioral, content, but also that organizational of those reflections, right? I mean, what am I prioritizing? How am I thinking about the process, about the assessment? And not just about the brand itself,
right,
but how am I impacting the people that I serve?
right.
I mean, am I respected by the people that I serve? I mean, that's also something to put out there. So thank you so much for providing us with that lens of with that philosophy, and for elevating that construct of what leadership means, what behavioral leadership means. So now, Wendy, I think that we might be ready for some conversations with the fellows. What do you think?
I absolutely think so. And I see that Charles has his hand raised. And I'm going to be relying on Megan to let me know as other people want to engage. But this is important, folks. This is your time. So Charles.
All right, Dr. Graphics, thank you so much for the very impactful presentation. I actually learned a lot from your sharing, especially on aspect of trying to build collective success when working with people, so that you will not end up taking glory. I see that as a very important aspect, because when a leader wants to get everything as his own, or as a way of getting satisfaction from there, it brings about distrust sometimes from other people who are also in service. And I have a saying that collective success in my leadership is the most guaranteed success. So succeeding together helps to build the team and help to make things work well. So I think that's a very important aspect. I wanted to ask a question regarding you are serving, but sometimes there is a temptation that some of your followers or some of those who believe in you will continuously try to push glory, and try to push more or less, trying to make sure you appear like a leader, taking glory for whatever that is happening, and trying to put it on you. I want your advice how to deal with such a situation when mostly attribution is being made to the leader about successes within an institution. Secondly, I would like to get your opinion. We got some good research findings that are very compelling about what will make a great leader, especially from the initial activities before the section. Very rewarding, including the interviews. But I also wanted to know what could really bring a leader down. Of course, we're talking about competence and trust in other areas, but what is it that could take a very good leader and take that person from where they are heading to another level, as another part of the research, if we have some findings available as such. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I had the questions. One was about the attributions made of followers about leaders and their glory. And the last question, second last question, was asking about what factors contribute to good leadership, I think.
Yeah, falling, a good leader falling.
Good leaders falling. Okay, excellent. All right, excellent. Wonderful questions. There's a whole bunch of research on attribution theory, and I'm sure Charles is certainly well versed in that, where there's a glorification of leaders, and that could be a cultural phenomenon. What I have found, just observationally, and there have been lovely studies that have examined the texts of leaders, their presidential speeches. The ones who most effectively disperse with that adoration and glorification focus on the people. They say, well, the emphasis is on, I am here only because we have this shared need, together, or this is only made possible through your efforts. There's this constant returning of the agency back to the attributor. So it's not about me, it's about us. And I'm simply the vessel, or the reflecting point, or the amplifying voice, as Luis kind of highlighted, for your message. This isn't about me. This is about us. It's about making change. It's about improving. And so the emphasis is to try to deflect and practice a deep felt sense of humility and humbleness, so that you're not appearing larger than life in the eyes of your followers, but rather they're seeing you as among them, but an important integral member, that kind of thing. So there's some research that have looked at, like, self-deprecating humor that leaders use, how often they use different kinds of pronouns, where they emphasize the we over the I. So lots of good research there, but the emphasis is kind of putting it back onto followers and reminding everyone it's their agency that has contributed to the cause. A good leader falling, I think research is pretty clear. There are some key character flaws and attributes, narcissism being one among the highest. The idea to feed my ego and the desire to be seen with acclaim through the eyes of others. There is a helpful amount of narcissism that has shown to be good for companies. It's the kind that allows me to take a risk and say, geez, I failed, but I'm still an okay person. And then there's the extreme part. Those persons that are operating without a moral compass, those people who, those leaders who turn others and view them as objects, depersonalizing, dehumanizing them, those people don't have a kind of a grounding in a spiritual faith or a belief, or just some type of recognition that you're existing with others, you're on the same footing. I have found that the absence of a grounding of that sorts allows people to be consumed with all of the things that are around them. Leaders get good treatment. You get first-class flights, you get people opening a door for you. It's always trying to remain humble and exercise a sense of humility in all of those interactions, recognizing the person who perhaps has the least to offer you, and also the person who's offering you the most, and be able to talk to both of them in the same fashion. It's that centrality, I think Luis highlighted it beautifully, that we're human, right? And I'm just occupying maybe a role, or I'm having a position of influence, or I'm simply influencing absent role and position to make other people feel better. So good leaders drink the Kool-Aid, as it were. And so that's one of the problems, because they lack a strong kind of compass, a moral North Star, or they rate very high on levels of narcissism.
Thank you, Jakari. The questions are just, to my delight, pouring in. So let's go on to the next one.
So I just want to quickly address that we've had some questions and comments in the chat as well.
Okay.
Thank you everyone for your comments. I just want to make sure I'll just give you a couple questions from the chat.
Okay, great.
Seemche asks a very difficult question. As a leader, how do you work with a team who are not motivated? And I'll also give you Alan's question. Is it better to lead from the front or lead from the back? Those are kind of related in a way in terms of thinking about motivating people. And then Fred has some really great comments that people might want to read through, thinking about how leaders fall and leadership structures. So that's great. And then next we'll take Ashaba's question. She's had her hand up for a while.
Yes, Ashaba. We need to have plenty of female voices in here as well. So Ashaba, what was your question? Shelby, you're muted at the moment. Oh, there we go.
No, I thought that the other people who asked questions were going to be answered first. Sorry. I'm very happy to be here. Yesterday, I didn't get a time to introduce myself. I'm called Ashaba Farida. I am a pilot from Uganda, and I'm also the founder of Bambino Life Organization, an organization that promotes child education and empowerment in rural areas of Uganda. Actually, I don't have a question as per se. I really love Dr. Jakari's presentation. It's really so inspiring, and it makes so much sense, because for me, on my journey through my leadership roles, I started learning that the more you relinquish power, the more powerful you become. That you reach a time whereby you realize that it's not about you, it is bigger than you, and it's about the people you are helping in the instance. And I also get some notes of philosophy in what you was sharing, and I'm very intrigued with philosophy. And it's really, really true, because when we find ourselves or when we look within ourselves, then we reach a time where we stop to, trying to put people down around you because you are in this leadership position. You understand that the more you elevate others, the more you put others on the forefront, the more you trust others, your team, when you trust them to work with you, when you trust that they're going to get the job done, the more you rest even within yourself. And in that way, even become more powerful, even though that is not the end goal. But for people who are going for that power thing, you realize that if you have a team and then you trust that your team is going to fulfill what they say they're going to fulfill, then you find yourself being able to explore so many people's strength, and their gifts and their talents, and you bring all of that together initially, and people do, see and realize that point when you're coming from that point of, trying to elevate yourself, but just trying to serve the others. And that has been on my journey, because when we go in these rural areas, one of the things you find is that the girls in these rural areas, I think, as most of our fellows can tell, those who go in remote areas, these girls already underlook themselves. Their self-esteem issues are very low, and the last thing you want to do is reach in front of them and try to show them that you're better than them. You have to first be their friend. You have to show them that you relate to them on that level. Then they'll accept you, or they'll allow you to be able to help them. And when you do help them, you're helping them from a point of it's going to be sustainable for them, even when you leave. And for me, I believe that is where true leadership comes in, to be able to put yourself in other people's feet, the empathy, without just assuming, trying to understand where they're coming from. And that is the best way you can help someone, when you truly understand how it feels to be in their feet. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. What else are you seeing in the chat, Megan?
So we've had some more comments in the chat. We've had a few more questions, but how about Jakari respond, if you could respond to those questions from the chat before and to Ashaba's comments. And then let's maybe take another round of people with their hands up, because we've had some fellows.
Great, that sounds great. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Okay. Is there times needed to be authoritative? Absolutely. And one of the things we didn't talk, we had a longer lecture, we would talk about the role of context. Authoritative and directive can sometimes be used synonymously. And so authoritative means just for the power's sake, I'm kind of directing, telling. Directing is trying to guide people toward the destination or goal. So I'm gonna use directive instead of, and I'm gonna say under conditions of uncertainty and crisis, directive leadership is absolutely superior than to say participative leadership, or because people are scared, they're worried, they trust your judgment, they wanna know what's next. Or when working with followers who are inexperienced or underdeveloped, they too need more direction and guidance because they don't know what's expected of them. So those are generally the instances there. And I'll use a really bad example. You can like him or not. Giuliani was the mayor of New York City during a very tough time. And people loved him. Changed the context, right? And some people disliked him. So same behavior, but if you shed a different light on it, people view it in a different way. So I just kind of want to highlight that.
Great, thank you. There was another question in the chat that had to do with motivation. And what if you're dealing with an unmotivated group? And I think in some respects, that's a place where the strengths assessment can be really helpful to a leader, because you will find out what the strengths are of the group and learn as a leader to play to those strengths. And to know based on the strength, what it is that those folks need that seem to be struggling, that seem to be lagging. So that again is another way to use the knowledge that you gain from strengths of yourself as well as the people with whom you work. So let's see here. I'm just looking through here. I'm having a hard time seeing some of the hands.
Shigo should be next.
Yeah,
Shigo?
Yeah,
Okay,
Shigo.
thank you.
The 9.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody, and thank you for the insightful talks. I've really found myself already introspecting about my work, introspecting about the manner in which I lead. But the question I had is, often there's an expectation from those who are led that a leader knows more than them, or that a leader ought to have all the answers, or ought to be better qualified, or just ought to be better positioned. And I wonder how a leader navigates that expectation in leading and in getting the trust of a team in you, because that's something that I've struggled with, the expectation that you know it all and you should know it all in order to lead. How does one handle that? Thank you so much.
No problem. That's a wonderful question. And
Yes,
I think, I think Wendy said it best. When you are recognizing or playing to the strengths of others, when you are lifting them up so that they become the spokespersons of knowledge, that will endear followers to you that you might not necessarily know all of the information, but you know who to go to for the information. And so it's really practicing a sense of humility around establishing the fact that we are an organization of people with different strengths and skills working together. I know a lot, but it's impossible for me to know everything. And so I'm going to lean on you and trust that our working together makes us all smarter, that we're multiplying our intelligences, and that us trading ideas and challenging each other is a healthy dynamic, because we want to make sure we're solving problems with the best information possible. So, I've seen it framed as with leaders saying, there's a lovely Harvard Business Review article. It's called The Incomplete Leader. And there's a lot of language in that article that specifies that I can't know everything. It's impossible. So let's lay the groundwork ahead of time and say, but I really know people well. I know your strengths well. I trust you folks. I'm really good with the strategy side, and I want to make sure we create something together that is representative of all of our unique contributions, all of our skills, all of our talents. And so it's like the conductor of an orchestra. They don't really play an instrument, right? But they're seen as the expert in many ways. It's kind of creating the space for others to shine, but knowing who to call on as needed. So I don't know if I answered your question, Jaco, but I hope it at least maybe is in the ballpark.
Good, really good question and good answer, Jakar.
As a leader, sorry, apologies.
Go right ahead.
Oh no, the question was just, does a strong leader admit that? So is it something you have at the back of your head that you're this conductor, or do you say, I don't know everything?
I think a strong leader who's grounded that in themselves, they're not, they have their ego intact, has no problem playing small when others are greater, so to speak, at a technical skill, some element of expertise. Now, I know that that could be a cultural phenomena there, particularly in societies where there's a high deference to authority. In those kinds of cultures, I think, and you see people here, I'll put it this way, you would lose more trust pretending to know everything and not, and you would gain more trust sharing openly and honestly that you don't. But in your role, you are charged with bringing out the best in others. You need to hear their voices. They're the expert. I'm not going to pretend to know otherwise. I don't know if that answers or extends the commentary there for you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We have time for one more question, and then unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up. So I see that Biniam has had hand up for some time here. So would you like to ask a question or contribute a perspective?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And for the sake of time, I'll make it brief. It was a very interesting presentation, and I was particularly interested in the study that was done on 150 or so countries, where the traits were identified, which for leadership. Yeah. And it was interesting because I guess you mentioned that it kind of controlled for cultural differences and cultural context in every country. But my question is, these are okay, these are fundamental leadership traits, but are there culture specific traits that show up in a significant way for a specific country? For instance, in Ethiopia or in Ghana, you can say, this trait is actually quite important versus the general characteristics.
Yeah, your point is a fair one. I think, again, visionary, being charismatic, that and having some integrity, I think those have universal appeal. So if you had to start at a place, I think those are universally endorsed. Now, in terms of maybe smaller cultural or societal differences, I know, for example, Eastern Europe prefers more of a directive style of leadership. And so the Western ideas maybe that are promulgated in the United States don't necessarily float well there, for example. And so there are nuances that you have to pay attention to that are important for getting the work done. But what the Globe study does highlight is that when you operate with visionary, charismatic, have integrity, or people-centered, and also have behaviors that map onto those societal expectations or exceed them, your leadership is more effective. So it's impossible to know all of the various ways people, enact their daily lives because of the culture that they're in. The leaders that are emerging, however, in those spaces will know them better. But it's a fair argument because oftentimes you have a lot of transplants. So we have a CEO or a VP that goes from one cultural context to another. And so they're having to kind of retool and relearn and understand what are the cultural nuances here that I have to pay attention to around things like motivation, around trust, around, the expression of emotionality, for example. I think a really good leader who is highly self-aware, attuned to differences in the environment, can kind of have really good pattern recognition, is going to see those little nuances while also being extremely visionary, charismatic, people-centered, and process-oriented. So I don't know if I answer your question, Biniam. I guess the response is it depends on the leader, and it also depends on the context.
Thank you so much, Jakari. We've come to the end of our hour. I really want to see us continue this discussion, and I know that both Jakari and Luis are very generous with their time. Megan, what do you think would be the best forum? Emails, group discussion board?
So Wing Kai just put on the chat. If you don't have time to ask your questions, you can put them on the chat right now. We'll have a record of this chat. We do also have a discussion board on Canvas that I'm not totally sure is active yet. I haven't checked that.
I haven't checked it.
I don't know if you checked it. But we'll keep track of these questions. I think a good place to talk about them might be our Track Foundation discussion session next week, which will have Wendy back with us. And Mike Krasanik, you guys may have watched that video already. So we'll be talking about ethical leadership, and we'll have a whole hour to talk about it. So
that's a great idea.
Jakari and Luis, you guys are not obligated to come to that, but if you're interested,
we would love to have you come, and you can expect another invitation from me for the final session as well. We'll see how that goes. Fellows, it's just been such a delight to hear your perspectives and to help us welcome our guests. I feel camaraderie developing already, and I can't wait to have more interaction with you. You may feel free to reach out to us, any of us, including me, at any time. If there's any way that we can assist, provide some more insights to you, help you with technical issues, any of those things, we're here for you. And we want nothing more than for you to thrive and succeed in all that is important to you. So thank you so much.
And just one quick reminder, we've organized an optional Zoom training. Obviously, we're all on Zoom, so we all know how to use it to some extent, but the IT gurus here on campus will talk through some of the features of Zoom in a little bit more detail. So if you're new to using Zoom, that session is at noon tomorrow. And I've made it I had it as an open meeting, but I added registration so we know how many people to expect. So please just register for that meeting if you plan to attend tomorrow, so I can let IT know how many staff they should have to help us out. All right, thanks guys.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, good night, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Take care, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Sleep well.
Thank you very much.
You can reflect, but you need
Thank
sleep
you.
too.
Great.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.